Ah, you thought I was done with Godzilla, didn't you? That's never gonna happen. I've made individual videos covering the first 6 Godzilla movies already, and I went in depth into their filmmaking and their themes, but this time, the style is gonna be a bit different. Before, I was very thorough and I broke down exactly why those movies worked on a fundamental level. Those studies, quote unquote, apply not only to just those 6 films, but the rest of the Showa series. But now we're going to be covering more ground a little faster. I figured that just because I've watched all these movies multiple times, most since childhood, doesn't mean that analyzing all of them will be necessarily easy. There's just so much to talk about, and for me, I can talk about these films all day. Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, or Ebirah Horror of the Deep, whichever you prefer. Personally, I prefer the former because it's a Godzilla movie. Directed by Jun Fukuda, the plot involves a guy named Ryota on a mission to find his brother that was lost at sea. He desperately needs a boat so he can set out on a rescue mission for said brother. So he attempts to join a dance competition where the grand prize is just that, a boat. But it turns out he's too late. He meets a few goobers while there, and they offer to at least show him where he can find one for himself. They loiter on private property and encounter a petty thief bunking in one of them. After bunking there themselves, Ryota takes his life into his own hands, steals the boat, and sets sail into the South Pacific without notifying anyone. But his dubious little plan is cut short when they're shipwrecked by Ebirah, this movie's monster villain. Washed ashore on a mysterious island, the gang not only find Godzilla sleeping there, but an entire terrorist organization called the Red Bamboo, who's kidnapped natives from the infant island to use them as slave labor. On this devil's island, guarded by Ebirah, these hopeless city dwellers must find a way to not just escape this place alive, but save the lives of the infant islanders and put a stop to the Red Bamboo's plans. All while Godzilla, Mothra, and Ebirah make weirdly small appearances in their own movie. In all my time as a Godzilla fan, I've never truly seen a film as looked over as this one. It seems Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster doesn't minister any true enthusiasm, and I never understood why. At least not fully. The cinematography and editing is much more energetic, it's faster, and the dialogue feels younger, less dry, less formal. Now, according to pure observation, this is because Ashiro Honda isn't at the forefront of these stories anymore. At least not terribly often. Ashiro and his tastes were defined by serious ensemble stories, ones with very potent allegorical themes about war, history, humanity. Many of his kaiju films deal with real-life issues. The monsters and their mythos were a canvas to speak on these issues. One unfortunate side effect of this serious attitude is that regardless of how much I like his movies, they end up having a much slower pace, one that an unfamiliar audience may not have the patience for. Even on recent rewatches of early 60s kaiju films of his, I catch myself kind of drifting off sometimes. The characters and scenarios end up being executed with a laxed and arduous demeanor that can only be compared to a saltine cracker. His films are more about the themes, which I get, but again, that's the drawback of such a style. It might not be engaging all the way through, especially if what you're looking for is action. But Jun Fukuda, on the other hand, according to his work on the Godzilla series that is, preferred to keep everything a little more loosey-goosey, a little more fun. You can't be serious all the time. And the Godzilla series was changing. The target audience was evolving. Children were watching these movies more and more. So what we have here is a Scooby-Doo-esque storyline with essentially cartoon characters, but the trade-off is that its script is a lot spunkier and adventurous, and therefore, I believe anyway, has a better time retaining an audience's attention. The characters are tolerable. I like them personally, especially Akira Takarada's character, but that's just cause Akira Takarada's a baller. I think Infant Islanders being captured is an awesome carryover of continuity. It really brings the whole world together. And any movie where Kumi Mizuno looks like a fellow Boricua is pretty... I'm not trying to make light of blackface, please just let me have this one. The human stuff is neat. I think it kind of meanders a lot through the second half, but come on, we're here for the monsters, and it's not great. I like Godzilla's presence. He's still menacing, but he feels like a guest star. Mothra and Ebirah feel like they belong in the plot, but Godzilla just appears. His screen time is really lacking, and at a certain point, you really feel it. This is partly because he was originally going to be King Kong, but regardless, King Kong's presence, if he was just going to be swapped, wouldn't have changed the film. It would have just stayed the same. Ebirah is... he's neat, I guess, but just look at him. He's just a scrunched up, pug-faced little lobster. You only see him in the water, and somehow Godzilla doesn't even kill him. Yeah, that's complete bullshit. The fight with Mothra is way more of a ooh, ah moment than this stuff. Ebirah is just really lame to base an entire movie off of. And while I think the film is competent, I think it's ignored for this very reason. Compared to Space Chickens or Satan, Ebra is just not that interesting, and therefore the action isn't all that interesting either, and no amount of charming acting or Kumi Mizuno can change that. It's a colorful film, and that it'll always have around its belt. The 60s charm is all over it, and I love it so much. But even Jun Fukuda has been quoted saying, "Toho sent me a copy of the VHS tape." What the fuck? I don't care about eBay, bro. Shut up. Toho sent me a copy of the VHS tape edition of Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster when it was released, and it was like opening an old wound. I didn't watch the tape. Is that an actual quote? Well, Wikipedia said so it must be true, right? Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster is a good time, a well-made one, but an entry that, in its totality, has a hard time sticking the landing. A fun island adventure, but with a script that doesn't really know what to do with itself by the end, and with special effects that either look weirdly amazing or just not catered to. Still, there's a lot to love here, really, I mean it. And for me, seeing tokusatsu is always going to be satisfying, but there's a point where you gotta really recognize that something is not quite making it. I feel like its premise was better handled in the next film, which we'll talk about right now. Son of Godzilla is just a better movie pretty much on every metric. Godzilla is called to the distant Solgale Island by an unborn member of his own species. It's not specified where this egg came from, but it later hatches into Manila, everyone's favorite Godzilla character. Manila seems to represent a point of no return for Godzilla himself. So much of the series has shown how angry he really is. He's always so grumpy, lacking the empathy and emotional reactions exuded from his American counterpart, Kong. Godzilla's hard shell is actually broken for once, as he's now responsible for looking after a child. He's pretty indifferent to Manila at first. When a rock flies into his face, Godzilla's just like, oh shit, oops. He doesn't care. Ultimately, he always manages to recognize the greater good when he needs to, and never leave Manila behind, no matter how much he's programmed to. Meanwhile, humans are performing weather experiments in hopes of achieving the ability to change the desolate areas of Earth into farmable land. But all the hubbub from their experiments has been mutating the animals on the island, including Kamacuras, a weirdly iconic fellow that I personally prefer over the three stooges that have been the villains for the past movie and a half. The monster action and the human storyline are balanced quite well, as they directly interact with each other far more than you'd expect. The script is more earnest, the characters are just more enjoyable overall, and it has a clear vision. All these movies, like I said before, involve man stepping over boundaries they don't understand. But that's kind of downplayed here in favor of the more focused storyline of the monsters. It's not as well shot or pretty to look at as Sea Monster, but its consistency with its goal of creating a fun action-adventure movie is accomplished with way more grace than the previous entry. I wish there were more moments like this in the series, of just emotional storytelling told exclusively by visuals. The light atmosphere of Son of Godzilla can be a little misleading, as the ending might actually make you shed a tear. In all of Manila's antics as a little kid, all he wants is to either have some fun or make his dad proud. He tries, oh he tries. He attempts to fight like his dad, yes, but Godzilla is always the one having to finish the job. In this scene, Manila is being buried in snow and stumbles on himself to exhaustion. The hatred Godzilla has fostered in all of his interactions with the outside world somehow disintegrates here. He can care, and he does. He comforts his son, choosing to go into hibernation with him instead of leaving the island altogether and saving himself. It's heartwarming, and the end product is a damn good movie in my opinion.
It does look like shit.
This is it. One of the most classic films in the genre. I never really cared for it.
I don't believe this. I don't believe you.
I got this movie for Christmas more than a decade ago, and I didn't quite grow the attachment to it that I had for lots of other Showa films. But that's simply because I was mainly looking for monster action, and Destroy All Monsters doesn't have as much as you'd expect. There's a silver lining to this, trust me. In the year 1999, all of Earth's monsters are collectively detained on an island called Monsterland, but an alien race only known as a Kilok take over the island and send every monster out to destroy Earth's cities in order to coerce humanity into surrendering the planet to them. Classic, right?
You know, it's a classic. It's
a grander evolution of the invasion plot from Astro Monster, just with slightly less awesome looking aliens. It took me years to really understand how huge this movie's scope was. This was meant to be the conclusion of not only the Godzilla series, but Toho's lineage of monsters as a whole. Not to say that these characters would have never made an appearance again, but due to lackluster ticket sales from the previous few Godzilla entries, Toho thought it would just make sense to end Godzilla's story on a high note. They built a whole new set for New York and only used it for like 2 shots. That's how much they stopped giving a shit. This was the finale. However, given what I just told you, it makes total sense that we'd get a lot more monster action than we did before. But also, like I just told you, not necessarily. Destroy All Monsters runtime is spent trying to figure out and dismantle the Keloq's invasion plan. Therefore, it's way more of a plot-driven film than any of its predecessors. The characters, even more so than Invasion of Astro Monster, are part of a collective, one that isn't concerned with personal affairs. It's more so interested in the broader fight against the aliens. The monsters really get to shine, not exactly through screen time, but through how that screen time is used. Clear, wide open shots during daytime of these beautifully elaborate and detailed sets with multiple monsters on screen at the same time. The scope and the tangibility of the special effects is amplified tenfold. Look at these images. Regardless of cheese, it looks good. I think it does. Well, Rodan still looks rough, but this shot of Kyoko walking into frame, standing ever tall as horrified citizens run past her in panic. It's the perfect example of this edge. Shot compositions are classy, like a spy thriller, like the scene where humans under Keloq control have a standoff with the UN. What a neat set piece, all right in front of this beautiful beach. Shots of buildings destroyed, falling apart. They're treated with the utmost care. And yes, it drags a bit. That's its only sin. It feels longer than it actually is, which is not really a good thing, but trust me, I've made long films before. Balanced pacing is a hard thing to get right. This was before Godzilla's enemies got batshit crazy. Most of his opponents were just larger versions of normal animals, but they look damn good together. I only appreciated Destroy All Monsters' ambitions recently. It took a while for it to grow on me, but here I am. It's weird to think that this world taken over by aliens was the very same world where the original Godzilla attack was just a single isolated incident. I wonder what Emiko was doing while all this was happening. She would have been like 80 years old or something. Although I think this film's pretty cool, all things considered, there's a lot more that I like about its successors, so let's dive into its infamous sequel. An expanse of concrete and smog pollute the retinas. Here, it's hard to breathe, it's hard to walk, it's hard to explore, it's hard to interact with others. Humans go to and fro about the land, sworn to their duty at all times. Family, there is hardly time for. And what's left after mom and dad leave for work? When school's out, in a dirty, half-rotted environment that's emptier than the hearts of the forefathers who created such a place. A lonely little boy, left to his own devices. A boy whose only refuge from the harshness of city life is the wide open spaces of Monster Island, where laws don't exist, just characters, just monsters. Godzilla's Revenge, or All Monsters Attack, is a film that's ripped apart for heavily relying on stock footage from other movies. But other than that criticism, it's hard to actually come up with things I actively didn't enjoy when watching. Yes, the kids in this film are really young, and depending on your mood, this can either be the movie's greatest obstacle or its greatest strength. I don't know, I feel maybe I have a pretty different perspective on this, but hear me out. The innocence of a child is something that is really hard to understand the value of until you've lost it. When you're a kid, everything is just exciting. The mishaps of the world are permissible as long as your imagination could take you somewhere else. Whether it be drawing, playing, exploring, nothing really mattered all that much. The joy you got from an activity was what made the activity worth pursuing. There weren't any bills I had to think about when making my Bandai creations bash each other upside the head for 15 minutes straight. I didn't have to worry about when or where I was getting my next meal. I just knew it was going to be fine. Even this caliber of innocence is a luxury for certain individuals, which within itself is painfully sad. Ichiro's life is somewhat desolate. He has a home, a mom, a dad, a friend, but when you actually look at what he does, how he acts, he's alone. He loves Godzilla and monsters. That's what brings him joy. That's what gets him through the day. But in the wake of a modern industrialized cityscape, that fiction is all he has. His parents try, God knows they do. You can't help but feel he doesn't know that his living situation isn't normal. Is it normal for mothers and fathers to depart from their child's lives for most of their days, only to have an hour or two with them before they have to go to sleep? What does that create? A child who needs to grow up fast to meet the needs that his family can't. Ichiro's dreams of Godzilla and his monster co-stars are what teach him how to be strong, how to stand up for himself through intense adversity. Looking at this young kid, innocently waddling himself through abandoned locations, or trying his hardest to literally escape the reality he's in, constantly by himself, might I add, made me feel a little miffed, like I couldn't do anything to make him feel better. But he doesn't seem to care. He's smiling all the way through. He doesn't realize how unprotected he is, or how depressing his circumstances are, and that's why I just don't have it in me to rip this movie to pieces. I felt like the story being told here was genuine. It may have been lighthearted, but it was personal. It spoke on the consequences of the industrialized, impersonal lifestyle that took over not just Japan, but the world at large. Children are always the first ones to suffer. The stock footage makes sense in the universe here. All Monsters Attack takes place in the real world. So Godzilla and the gang are literally movie characters. Ichiro may very well just be remembering and dreaming about scenes he's literally watched in the movie theater. Manila and Ichiro have parallel arcs, both of which contribute to helping each other's arc grow. Gabro, the new monster here, is one that clearly looks fucking stupid, but somehow, I don't know how, it still manages to be pretty frightening. He shoots lightning out of his arms. How can you say the special effect doesn't look good? His saturated green skin, I think, stands out in the multitude of grays and browns that Godzilla's villains took after before this movie. The suitmation is just as expressive as ever, and Gabra gives Godzilla a damn good brawl by the end. Godzilla is actually stopped in his tracks several times at the sheer strength of Gabra's abilities. Of course, he gets his ass kicked, but considering the kicking he gave Godzilla and his son, I think it's weird that Gabra isn't really liked that much by fans. I love him, I'm being serious. He's pretty cool. All Monsters Attack was made with a pathetically small budget, and in a time where Japan was changing, TV was eradicating profitability in theatrical releases, and the environmental issue was getting really out of hand. This story, although clearly not without its faults, is far more competent as a film than most people will ever give it credit for. Since I was Ichiro's age, I related with him, and as a grown adult, I feel bad for him. To be frank with you, Ichiro is one of my favorite human characters in the Godzilla series because of that. That dusty, urbanized, post-war Japanese aesthetic is oozing from All Monsters Attack, and was cemented as iconic to me for years to come. What, you thought the video was over?
Ain't gonna happen.
Ain't gonna happen now.
Ain't gonna happen.
Ain't gonna happen.
Ain't gonna
I'm
happen.
gonna tell you a little secret. In a move unparalleled in this channel's history, we are gonna analyze all 9 of the movies left in the Showa era in one single video. We're going rogue. No going back now. We have 5 more Showa films left to cover. So grab some drinks, grab some pizza, make some popcorn. It's an all-out Godzilla marathon. Christ, where do I even start? It's clear that Hedorah's vision was different from its brethren. Godzilla, like I said before, was a series used to comment on real-world geopolitical issues. Kiyoshi Mitsubano, Hedorah's director, was dead set on returning Godzilla to that potent allegory he was in the 50s and early 60s, but Godzilla had already transitioned into the protagonist. No longer the villain representing the horrors of the atom. The current-day problem he wanted to tackle was pollution. Industrial mercury poisoning, unbreathable air, these weren't uncommon in post-war Japan. Outbreaks of diseases like Minamata and Itai Itai, the latter meaning ouch ouch disease. Itai Itai disease first came about due to cadmium mining that started during the Russo-Japanese War, and by extension World War I. In Toyama, cadmium had been absorbed into the water sources and plant life. It resulted in the kind of poisoning that softens bones and weakens the kidneys. Over the 20 years after World War II, the post-war economic miracle had made Japan into a giant industrialized machine, by proxy also making it the most polluted country in the world by the time this film was greenlit. Industrial waste was mishandled by the homeland's own huge corporations, and the world that kids like Ichiro, for instance, had to grow up in because of this was a dusty, brown, decaying den of tainted air and dead fish. This was a big problem. Hedorah was born from this horror. The pain and suffering of the innocent created Hedorah, but it also created Godzilla. While Godzilla was angry and wrathful, Hedorah was corrosive and decadent. Godzilla wanted revenge. Hedorah only consumed. Godzilla had a personable soul, a personality, a will that changed over time. He was adaptable, getting past his hatred for humans, and now considered the protector of Earth. Hedorah, however, is not agreeable. There is no convincing him to fight for the greater good. He is a comic supervillain, and loves being bad. It's almost cute. The imagery in Godzilla vs. Hedorah is petrifying. More graphic than anything this series had expressed at that point. Disgusting oceans of scum, smog-ridden cityscapes, and a youth culture that is so dejected from the decay of their own civilization that all they care about is subjecting themselves to drugs and partying, unwilling to commit to helping a world they already see is doomed. The human characters are not terribly important in this movie. Every bout of plot is initiated by either the science of Hedorah's biology, or moving the film's themes ever forward into the audience's face. Nearly every scene displays the message against pollution, and you'd think it would get tiring, but I don't see it that way. The animated segments, which most people see as an out-of-place addition, I think are the best parts of the movie. The first displaying what Hedorah wants, which is our resources. The next displaying that our own decisions to rid the planet of green is fueling exactly what Hedorah wants, even if it means destroying and consuming the very thing that helped create him. And the next, an apocalyptic vision of Tokyo, one where normal everyday citizens are forced to wear Hedorah-proof masks, sold as if they're a fashionable luxury. More critique of mankind's insistence on commodifying things fundamentally necessary for survival. A world where Hedorah reigns as the dominant life form on Earth. I think they're brilliant, simplistic but effective. Not to mention using animation just really helps portray the message. Hedorah's effect on humans is far more direct than it is with most of Godzilla's opponents. The toxic gas he emits suffocates us. It radically disintegrates our skin, reduces us to bone like an acid. He falls down and he floods the streets with his muck. Stray parts of his body become sentient. Godzilla punches him and his fist goes right through him. Hedorah is so much taller than Godzilla, and he adapts, constantly upending the limits humans think he has. There's this kid with a psychic connection to Godzilla. That's it, that's all I have to say about that. I, for one, am in love with the drugged out, colorful abstractions littered throughout the movie. An interesting and intentful juxtaposition given the pretty serious subject matter. While people from the outside are literally being smothered to death in Hedorah's sludge, these youngsters are partying like there's no tomorrow. Within the film itself, the futility of that carefree attitude is commented on in this scene where the very same youngsters have the very same kind of party on Mount Fuji. What can only be interpreted as the spirits of the older generations. This gang of older people watch in disillusionment as their descendants abandon the world they're supposed to save and give into their pessimism. The whole reason they start partying is because they think the world is going to end. And instead of doing anything about it, they just get fucked up and make fools of themselves. Nothing's really changed. Even after Hedorah is killed, the world is still toxic. Godzilla vs. Hedorah is a very dire call for action, a call for change. And its filmmaking methods, while definitely unconventional, work very well. It's fucking weird, I'm not gonna deny that here. Every time this scene pops up, it just takes me out of it. Like, guys, really? A movie driven purely by themes, with special effects that look really good, when they have more than one take, that is. Godzilla really has met his match, in what can only be described as the most climactic battle yet. The world really is at stake when Godzilla goes toe-to-toe with the smog monster, draped in the darkness of the night. Hedorah is a weirdly original mound of slime that manages to trademark the most formless monster stereotype there is.
I'm benzoate ostlazine bicarbonate, or you can call me Bob, whichever's easier.
Despite its message, I still think the polluted aesthetic is just so cool. Wait, Godzilla does do that. Why does he do that? Why does Showa Godzilla wipe his lips? So I haven't really found much as to why that is the case, but what I can only come to the conclusion of is that it's kind of a visual signal of up yours, like screw you, like my shit talking is for you, yeah, I guess. I'm being dead serious, that's like the only thing I could possibly think. A manga artist named Gengo is on hard times and is looking for work. His girlfriend Tomoko gives him directions to a place where he might actually find a fucking job. This place is World Children's Land, a monster-themed theme park made to promote peace, quote-unquote. He gets the job as a monster designer for the company, but sooner or later he gets wrapped up in a rescue mission and an entire alien invasion that can only be stopped by the king of the monsters himself. The Roaches. This is the film debut of my favorite Godzilla monster, Gigan. His design is perfect, a sharp, bladed chimera cyborg that's the most sadistic character in the series. Gigan loves hurting people. With every swing of his blade arms, or kick from his little elf shoes, you can tell he wants to do it. Godzilla vs. Gigan is a film that's been with me for a long time, and it was one of my favorite Godzilla movies ever. Hell, one of my favorite movies ever. But that was years ago, and I come to you in 2025, a 21-year-old college student, one whose tastes have evolved, yes. Yeah, I'm just a higher being now. I actually like Godzilla's Revenge. Watching this movie now offers a somewhat less whimsical reaction. This movie is rough. I do realize I gave All Monsters Attack a pass on this, but the stock footage here really takes you out of the experience. In fact, I think Godzilla vs. Gigan is the worst offender of this. With All Monsters Attack, the stock footage, although pretty egregious, recycling scenes in their entirety instead of individual shots here and there, made some lick of sense. Once you get over it, it's a fun little movie. But Godzilla vs. Gigan throws you back and forth in between shots that are in completely different times of day, and sometimes with entirely different monsters in them. Look, there's Mothra. It's distracting, like I can't focus on the actual action because my mind is associating the reused footage with the context it had from its original source. This might not have been nearly the issue it is now, back in the 70s, given that it's not like VHS existed in order to fill in an audience on context they would receive from a previous entry. And at this point, it was mostly kids watching. Half of them shouldn't have even stepped foot in a theater by the time Hedorah the three-headed monster came out. Maybe they weren't even born yet, so who gave a shit? Constant reuse of music is apparent too. The budgets were getting thinner and thinner, and it shows. God, that sucks to say. The plot itself I thought was pretty fun when I was younger. Even now, I actually enjoy how cartoony everyone is. I find it appealing. I guess I just prefer animation most of the time in general. And they're all so stylish. Dude. Bro. I think I was watching the scene where Shosaku and Machiko are trying to infiltrate the Godzilla tower near the climax when I felt a strong odor of boredom fizzle into my brain. What's the point? The script was just meandering about, going back and forth for a human plot that just has nothing really interesting going on. Of course, the monsters are great, but I'm watching a movie, guys. If I wanted to watch only fight scenes, I'd look it up on fucking YouTube. I want story, plot, emotion. And don't tell me not to expect that from this genre. Shut the fuck up. Ugh, I can't be too hard on this movie. Its characters are perfectly tolerable, and I wouldn't mind having a brewski with them. This is the most mystery ink that a Godzilla cast has been, and I find that really charming. But the characters themselves aren't given a tremendous amount to do. I think they should have went a little more bonkers with this one. Maybe a little more expressive, and leaned into that manga aesthetic the film seemed to be pushing. 1972 was the time Devilman made his debut, so the medium was cooking. In fact, a really large part of why I'm still fond of Godzilla vs. Gigan is the visuals. The colorful fashion of the characters, the at the time modern nature of the architecture and furniture. It's also fun. So bright and warm. I like the 70s a lot. I'll come out and say that. And when I say visuals, I also mean the tokusatsu. Even though half the suits are decaying on screen, you can tell they still had it. Look at these shots of Gigan coming in and out of view from moving within the smoke. You feel Gigan's weight and presence. When a building gets smashed, it's shot very well. The entire attack on the city at night is just a very well executed set piece. I don't think we've seen such a thorough destruction scene like this in a while. Godzilla and Anguirus. Did I mention Anguirus is here? No? Well, he's actually my second favorite Godzilla monster besides Gigan. And they're both in this movie. Ain't life neat? Anyway, they're even more personified here, this time with speech bubbles, which doesn't feel as weird as it sounds. I like it. Godzilla vs. Gigan, although I can definitely defend it, has a really hard time walking on its 2 feet. The characters, although cute and cheesy in all the right ways, aren't enough to keep your attention for a story that's been beat to the ground and done better in other films. The monster carnage is really good, and the final fight scene is one of the more brutal ones that we've seen so far. But even then, it's brought down by just really obscene amounts of stock shots and stock sequences. The whole thing feels cheap, and it can't get away with it this time. It's so blatant that behind the scenes, Toho, Tanaka, and the director, Jun Fukuda, were really strapped for cash, time, and resources. The Japanese film industry was in shambles, and spoiler alert, it didn't get much better until after the Godzilla series had already bit the dust around 1975. This movie could have been really great. I think a more focused theme or commentary on social issues would have electrocuted some life into it, but that takes time and extended thought. Toho didn't want to give that to any of them. So what we have here is a fogged up window of a Godzilla movie. You can see right through it, but whatever's stuck on it is distracting just enough for your eyes to forget it's looking outside, that you're looking at empty space. The filmmakers are just getting by here. This movie will always have a special place in my heart. It accompanied me on many late nights when I couldn't sleep and needed something to put on to keep myself occupied, or if I just wanted to not feel like I was by myself. And for that, I'm thankful. It entertained me back then, and just like an old friend, you can always revisit it for a good reminder of how nice things are when you really want them to be. Yeah, maybe my perception of it has changed, but it's still here, isn't it? Waiting patiently for me to swing by again sometime on a warm Saturday afternoon when the house is quiet and it's about to rain. That's Godzilla vs. Gigan for me. And I'm okay with that. I remember when I was little, Godzilla vs. Megalon was my holy grail. In the United States, this movie wasn't released on DVD until 2012. For years, all I had were Cinemassacre's review of it, and random clips on YouTube of random destruction sequences. Think about it, it was only on VHS until 2012. That's fucking insane. So one Christmas morning, I rushed downstairs and to my surprise, there it was. Godzilla vs. Megalon, along with lots of other Godzilla movies I thought were impossible to find up until then. At the time, I didn't know why movies like this one, Destroy All Monsters, Godzilla 1984, and Godzilla vs. Biollante were so hard to find. As an adult, I realize now that it was Toho's fault. They're apparently very hard to work with. When I finally got to watch it, I loved it. It was exactly what I thought it was. From watching its old trailers, it made the film out to be a huge climactic battle that only the most diehard Godzilla fans could actually get a hold of. And yeah, as a kid, I got what I was promised. And then some. I've watched this movie countless times, as I have with all these films, but somehow, by the grace of God, Godzilla vs. Megalon achieves what Godzilla vs. Gigan wanted to do. Tell a really simple but fun story that involves an alien invasion and Godzilla once again heeding the call of battle. At this point, Godzilla movie's storylines and characters were on the level of Hanna-Barbera. That's not a bad thing, but there's still a threshold you need to meet with that. If you're going to make simplistic one-dimensional characters, you gotta make them interesting. Either funny or ridiculous or earnest, the writing still has to be of quality. Godzilla vs. Gigan's characters had everything they needed in order to be interesting, but the filmmakers were more concerned with how they were involved in the plot rather than developing each of their quirks, so each of their traits don't have much purpose or room to grow. Well, given that, you may think Godzilla vs. Megalon must be doing a better job at that, right?
Godzilla vs. Megalon's characters are the worst thing since my wife divorced me.
No, but seriously, they're probably the most simplistic we've ever gotten in the series thus far. And that's both not a compliment and somehow the movie's strength. The film does not give a shit about giving time to these characters. They're as interesting as a picket fence. But with that sentiment, it seems the gang at Toho knew this, as most of the movie is actually action. Nothing above average here, but it's interesting at least. Staying engaged in Godzilla vs. Megalon is so much easier than its predecessor. The goof here is intentional, and I found myself charmed by its willingness to just go wild. The Ceetopians, an underground civilization flooded by the Earth millions of years ago, is out for revenge. Mankind's underground nuclear tests have been disturbing their peace for too long, and they send out their god, Megalon, to destroy the human world for good. A wonderfully weird society, but I like it. We got some South Pacific inspired enemies in the Godzilla lore for once. That's pretty interesting. They want to steal a robot called Jet Jaguar, built by Goro Ibuki, for the purpose of using him as a template to build an entire army of jets for their invasion of surface-level Earth. After all the hijinks of the Ceetopian schemes, Jet Jaguar breaks free of their control and sets out to find the king of the monsters so Earth can stand a chance against the evil Megalon and Gigan, a match made in heaven. A four-way, star-studded slamfest. This, my viewers, is what makes Godzilla vs. Megalon so entertaining. The monsters' personalities are amplified even more, taking up far more screen time than before. In all, well not all, but most shots that the monsters are in, the sets, the miniatures, they look so realistic. Take the scene of Megalon destroying the dam. The camera is angled perfectly and Megalon looks enormous. Water treading between his feet as he makes mincemeat of man's toys. Megalon himself is portrayed so well. He's just as dubious as Gigan, but while Gigan is a lot more calculated, almost getting distracted with how much fun he's having hurting people, Megalon is wild, jumping around like a little kid, destroying things purely because it's there. He's a troublemaker, a lot more childish in demeanor than the cold and sadistic Gigan, and his design is so striking. Gigan, I feel, is definitely more interesting overall, but Megalon's color palette alone is mesmerizing. Sure, earthy browns all over, but his eyes and especially his carapace are a deep saturated yellow, almost an orange, popping out with the black tiger stripe patterns weaved along its hard armor plating. Drill hands help. They give him a level of might that Gigan lacked. Gigan is more like a sleek, quick killer. Megalon is pure power. Jet Jaguar was never one of my favorite characters, but everyone likes him for some reason. It was only recently where I kinda got it. Godzilla here sports a slight redesign that I think trumps anything that came after Mothra vs. Godzilla. The fight between these four has to be seen to be believed. I really can't comment on it. It's the most satisfying single monster brawl of the series. It wears its wackiness on its sleeve. It knows that its only goal is to have a lot of fun, so its human characters being as paper thin as they are doesn't bother me. The filmmakers didn't give a shit about that. They made the most out of the severe lack of resources they were gifted with, and they cut the fat, cut the bullshit, and gave the audience, which was children, exactly what they wanted. A monster romp that throws reality out the fucking window. I'm saying this in full awareness of the pretty horrendous use of stock footage still present, and in light of the bare bones plot / characters, I simply don't care anymore. There's a level of humility that you have to have when watching these movies. They tried very hard to tell these stories with what they had. What you should be asking yourselves is whether or not the filmmakers were successful at what they set out to do. With Godzilla vs. Gigan, they set out to harken back to the slower paced alien invasion stories of the 60s, and had a pretty hard time conveying that to the audience as well as they did before. It's not a failure, but its bones are brittle. Godzilla vs. Megalon didn't intend on making such a world-ending story. They wanted to make a pop wrestling match, and I believe they succeeded. Versus Megalon, even though I love it, was a signifier that things needed to change. This wasn't where Godzilla came from. He wasn't a character that should have stooped so low. At the time, this movie wasn't received well, and rightfully so. But in spite of its clear, horrible dips in quality and scope, I want to just say to the filmmakers behind it, it brought me a lot of joy, just like Godzilla vs. Gigan did when I was younger. There is still value here despite its bleeding wounds. A great evil has fumed itself into the very cracks of Azumi Castle. Soon, a black mountain will cover the sky, the sun will rise in the west, and a horrifying monster will rise to destroy the world. Little does anybody know that this great monster is Godzilla himself, but he stopped destroying buildings a while ago. He's clean, honest. It's not him. It's Mechagodzilla. A mighty machine with no soul and no remorse. Godzilla hasn't faced an enemy this dastardly before, and even he isn't enough to take down this titanium mammoth. The great protector of the ancient Okinawan royal family, King Caesar, is the only ace in our cards that can give humanity and Godzilla the leg up they need in order to stop not only Mechagodzilla, but the alien race behind him. A spy thriller, a mysterious adventure that rolls out its plot slowly but effectively. We've seen Godzilla at his lowest, cheap films made on the fly to appease a quota. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, however, has the elegance and class of Ishiro Honda's original run as director, while still keeping the much more dynamic and energetic style of Jun Fukuda's work. Yuzuru Aizawa, this film's cinematographer, is able to express beauty in such a subtle way, usually in moments of complete silence. The blood-red sun, the gorgeous blue hues of an Okinawan shore, the shadowy close-up of Nanbara's face as he smokes a cig. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla is a very pretty film to look at. Its soundtrack is full of big band and jazz, trading in a little bit of Akira Ifukube's orchestral sound for a bit more of a percussion-based soundscape. It's more exciting, so loud and funky. I associate jazz with Mechagodzilla as a character all the time. It conveys the idea that this automaton is the new kid on the block, able to do nearly everything Godzilla can't. An adaptable and quick-thinking powerhouse, the jazz being the perfect counterpart to Godzilla's more slow-trotting traditional symphony. The special effects sequences are finally back to being elaborate and detailed. The pyrotechnics in Godzilla's first bout with Mechagodzilla looks really convincing. Wide shots within the set look beautiful. A sharp, fiery red consumes the palette. The fighting is better. King Caesar is a welcome addition to the cast. A vicious, barbaric wild card that runs headfirst into a fight knowing he might get his ass kicked. Mechagodzilla's design itself is so menacing. Bolts and a pronounced eyebrow ridge. He wants to hurt you, but Gigan at least enjoys it. Mechagodzilla is a cold hitman, calculated in every way Gigan couldn't be. He's not distracted by the enjoyment of the kill. He does what he's told. Its characters have a defined purpose in serving the plot and mystery of the prophecy at hand. But as it goes on, there does come a point where the balance between the monsters and the humans becomes a little bit out of whack. And given the plot-centric nature of these characters, they don't give an awful lot in the way of emotional investment. But since it's not the movie's intention to focus on that, it makes sure there isn't too much time spent without some action, let alone monsters. The actors take their roles seriously again. They're mature, they're adults with actual jobs to do. A sharp contrast to the childish fare we've been getting for the last few years. They play it straight, no dilly-dallying. I feel like Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla is a much more complete movie, a breath of fresh air after years of unfortunate declining quality. Not to mention that the extra moolah gave the production a lot more locations to work with. A whole ass ship, Okinawa itself. The James Bond-esque story is one that's aged well. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla is yet another epic chapter in Godzilla's original lineup. And with that said, we've come to the last movie of the Showa era. And what a joy it is that I can finally talk about it. It is with great pleasure that I bring this retrospective to a close with none other than one of my favorite films of all time.
あなたの考えているような人間じゃない。おやめになってください。お願いです。チャールズが。下のチャールズが。
In the wake of Mechagodzilla's grand defeat in Okinawa, the aliens behind his failed invasion of Earth have chosen not to back down. In an unprecedented move of persistence, the people of Black Hole Planet 3 have rebuilt their mechanical doppelganger, and this time with the help of a member of the very same species they seek to destroy. Dr. Mafune, a man corroded by his bitter hatred for humanity, a man shunned for his demented obsession with controlling animals. His biggest project, the mind control of a giant dinosaur named Titanosaurus, with the intention of using it to further his global plot for revenge against all mankind for dismissing his research and sending him and his family into a life of poverty. The Mad Doctor and the aliens join forces so that Mechagodzilla can have a teammate of his own. The person at the center of this collection of Earth's most hateful residents is a young woman named Katsura. Katsura was killed following an electrical accident during Dr. Mafune's experiments on Titanosaurus, but the aliens rebuilt her, resurrected her, as a cyborg. Now the whims of adolescent wonder are a distant memory. Now she lives as a servant for her father, and the aliens that cursed her with a second chance. Her demeanor is reserved, lifeless. Only the most earnest and genuine of emotions have the luxury of surfacing. Her life is empty, living alone in a dusty mansion, as her father's madness sinks both of them into a ditch of no return. Forced to secure the obedience of Titanosaurus, and by proxy, the extinction of all humanity. Abiding by the aliens, bending to the will of her father. Nothing she does is of her own volition. It's only when she meets a man named Ichinose, an innocent person who believes in her father's work, that her dilapidated will begins its journey of restoration. She herself isn't used to experiencing her own emotions. Not anymore, but the earnesty of Ichinose and his passion for finding Titanosaurus brings out a subtle meekness that doesn't exist otherwise in her life of cold solitude. She knows deep down that Interpol's plans of attempting to study Titanosaurus after the inciting nautical incident of the film will only result in their deaths, for all of what's transpired concerning the beast is completely by design, planned. Her anxiety attributed to her sudden interest in Ichinose's purity is enough to stir the evil doctor and his alien comrades. From Ichinose showing humanity to this stranger, Katsura is slowly but surely not only falling in love with him, but is revealing parts of Titanosaurus' secrets to Interpol. What Ichinose sees as Katsura breaking out of her shell and showing joy again is seen as dangerous by her twisted family. They cannot afford to have Katsura feel. She's reminded by said family that she is nothing but a robotic shell of what she used to be, only fueled by the hatred she's supposed to have for humanity. But what's left of her soul is telling her otherwise. Godzilla is the only thing on Earth that can stand a chance against Dr. Mafune's mad plans of world domination. After Katsura's second death at the hands of Interpol agents, it's decided that she'll be resurrected and become Mechagodzilla's biological brain. Essentially selling his daughter into slavery, Mafune shows his first actual signs of regret, but it's not enough. Eventually, a full frontal assault on Tokyo is at hand. At the very core of its operation is the girl that won't be allowed to die in peace. In the Showa series' most explosive and high-stakes action sequence, Godzilla's might is equaled. Mechagodzilla and Titanosaurus make an iconic and powerful duo. Aside from a few shots that clearly needed another take, the viciousness of this fight is exciting, as Titanosaurus acts as the anti-King Caesar, a tall, scaly red wall of flesh that does exactly as he's told. After being shot yet again, Katsura is confronted with what she believes herself to be and what she actually is. a girl that's had her life puppeteered by the putrid corrosion of her father's heart. From Ichinose's kindness, she can finally see herself as a human, with thoughts, dreams, feelings, and a will. But there is no peace achieved at her ultimate reconciliation with her soul. In a final act of her own desire to do right by her inherent humanity, she shoots herself, destroying the brain of the alien's perfect life form. Mechagodzilla's rampage is utterly stopped, and Godzilla can finally deliver the killing blow, not only saving Earth yet again, but allowing Katsura to finally pass on, unburdened by wills other than her own. The film begins with an outlook of a shiny gold-coated ocean, and it ends with one, with a shot that I can only understand as Godzilla riding off into a sunset, a shot that's essentially Godzilla saying goodbye. This shot is why I find the ocean to be a symbol of finality, a symbol of the end. Katsura's death is the bookend that mirrored the sacrifice that killed the first Godzilla. Technically, Destroy All Monsters is the finale to the Showa Godzilla canon, but in retrospect, I'm never truly satisfied with that ending on Monster Island. There's no true thematic edge to bring Godzilla's ideas as a character to light as a conclusion. But here, I see the opposite. The tone of Terror of Mechagodzilla is a serious and dramatic one, purely different from the goof and lighthearted intentions of later Showa Godzilla stories, much more like a spiritual successor to early Showa works. Terror of Mechagodzilla feels like the actual ending to all these movies, one last epic for the end of an era. Its characters are a step above what's usually written for these movies, and can only really be compared to the likes of the original Godzillas. Godzilla 1954's main goal being delivering a grave warning for all of humanity through the death of Serizawa and Godzilla respectively. In Terror, Godzilla has changed. It's accepted that Godzilla's job now is to protect Earth from forces he deems as disruptions to peace. Serizawa's death was so that the first Godzilla and his own invention would never torment the world again. Katsura's sacrifice is done so that she can actualize her will as an individual, her own humanity, helping Godzilla by proxy. Both for the salvation of the world, but done for completely different reasons, under completely different circumstances. It's directed by Honda himself after all. There is potent finality in Terror's story, and higher prospects when it comes to its special effects sequences, dynamic camera movements within the miniature sets themselves, something you never see in these films. There's a confidence, a willingness to do what hasn't been done before for the sake of the scope of the story. The sets are huge, extremely detailed for the low budgets of the last entries. Titanosaurus, I'll say, is one of my favorite giant monsters ever, just fantastical enough without losing the more science-based origin. Whatever that means in these stories. I think his color palette plays a part. You don't see too many kaiju with purely red bodies, and unlike Hedorah for instance, Titano's body is littered with other colors like yellow, orange, and black for his numerous warts. Godzilla's suit alterations from 73 onward are ones that I think add a fierceness that he hasn't had since maybe 1964, and Akira Ifukube's sound is the best it's ever been. The main theme, a haunting, bombastic piece that exudes the blood-curdling feeling of seeing something so awe-inspiring in its capability to destroy everything in its path. The emotional pieces like Katsura's theme or the ending theme are equally as effective, the latter having a somber, bittersweet arrangement. It makes me kind of melancholic, a triumphant victory hidden within deep sorrow. Katsura Mifune is my favorite character in the Godzilla series. Since childhood, I've always remembered that name, the name of the girl that lived as a cyborg. I could go on and on about everything I love about this movie. The autumn aesthetic, the vibrant fashion, the dark dustiness of Dr. Mifune's estate, the fights, Godzilla's first entrance, the funny perspective shots that clearly don't work but somehow don't affect the tone. All of it add up to a film that's been burned into my subconscious since I was a kid. And besides the 1954 original, it's my favorite movie from this era. Interestingly enough, my favorite Godzilla movies also tend to be my favorite movies as a whole. I hope one day I can create something like Terror of Mechagodzilla, at least a piece that'll mean something for someone as much as this movie does for me. It's hard to find the words to describe something that means this much to you. Since I could remember, this movie series has been there, exposing me to so many ideas, so many concepts that just never left me, from all eras. But the first series, the Showa era, was what I was shown first. Creation isn't easy. The battle between the will to tell a story and the ability to actually tell it is fierce. A lot of times you need to meet halfway. But ultimately, would you really want to? Like most people, no. I would say no, at least. But life is never going to care about that sentiment. How badly you want your voice heard, how determined you are. Something is going to get in the way, whether it be creative differences with your peers, financial struggles, talent, experience, studio interference, all of it. Sometimes all at the same time. I'm a filmmaker. I've been in lots of indie projects, always being propelled by my sheer will to do it, to make it, and the grace of others who want to participate. Putting together a script is only an eighth of the battle. Configuring a crew, compensating them, usually with food because I'm broke, being in charge of the camera, making sure its batteries are charged, making sure everyone's wardrobe is consistent, scheduling every single shoot and finding locations, making sure there's transportation, buying all the props, trying not to forget a prop at home on set, time constraints because everyone has a life of their own that they cannot dismiss for the sake of the movie. Special effects, God, special effects are an entire production of their own. All of it is typically supposed to be handled by different departments with an entire group of people assigned to each. But for me, those burdens are mine to bear. It has been my responsibility as a director and the creative head of everything that has lived and breathed on this channel. Although I had help from others here and there, these tasks have been solely mine to think about and solve for the sake of the care of not only the production of my films, but also for the ease and comfort of the people I have gotten to take part in these productions. I deal with it so they can focus on doing their best on set. And all this for a film that probably won't get much attention at all. That's just the life of a person whose opportunity is solely built on the will to get it done. I'm sure if you're actually under a professional funded studio, all this work, all this manpower, or lack thereof, wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But still, I'm not a studio. I'm just me. That's just the life of an indie filmmaker, and I know anyone watching this that wants to do this with their life can relate. It really doesn't get easier. If you don't fully believe that the story you want to tell is important to you alone, then all hope is lost. And a lot of times, your vision for what you wanted changes as the production goes along. Realizations of fat that needs to be trimmed, or dialogue that needs to sound more natural. These changes happen randomly and unpredictably, all for the good of the film's quality. Budget, ability, and even the creative process while working on the art itself will always hold you back from what you've pictured in your brain to some extent, which in my experience is not actually a bad thing. Usually the end product is better for it, strangely enough. The film's existence alone as a completed work, given the uniquity of said film's circumstances, is what makes it valuable. The fact that you did it, you had the will to trot on and overcome the challenges of its creation, is all that matters. The reason why great films are celebrated is because the art of filmmaking has so many factors at hand that a single perfected vision rising from the ashes of the chaos becomes a marvel to witness. I've studied the genre of tokusatsu for my entire life. It's never been a very mainstream genre despite its rocketing merchandise sales worldwide. And I've heard the same excuse for dismissing it over and over. The effects just don't look convincing. It's just a guy in a rubber suit. It's just a model of a building. They treat the notion of practical physicality like it's somehow a testament to a movie's fakeness, like it makes the film laughable or too unrealistic for viewing as a serious work of art. I'm fully aware that individuals who say this typically don't care much for the topic anyway, but hearing arguments like this has been the crowning shared experience that all Godzilla fans have had, attempting to defend the genre and its merit against the pure might of Western production design. These are the same hurdles that people like me have to be confronted with 24/7, simply because of the scrappy nature of the art's creation. A lot of times, your best isn't going to be enough to convince others you are worth the effort. You shouldn't have to convince others that you are. The filmmakers of these movies didn't care. They wore the limitations of their medium and their technology on their sleeves. So why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't you? Why shouldn't you be proud of what you've accomplished? No one did it. No one made it. Only you did. It couldn't exist without your courage, without your will. It's more than most can say about what they've made. Most people can't draw a stick figure. Special effects, both digital and practical, are supposed to convince you that what you're seeing is truly interacting with what we perceive to be reality. You need to suspend your disbelief, and that demand has gotten easier and easier to do as technology advances. At a certain point, your mind really does believe that it's watching an alien woman named Natiri riding a banshee through the sky, not the person, Zoe Saldana, being blanketed by lots of dazzling colors and 3D polygonal graphics. As you peel back the years before CGI, it's hard for the newer generation to care much for the conduits of each era's cultural zeitgeist. It just looks so stupid to people. Tokusatsu has shown me time and time again that the very definition of a special effect is not meant to fool you that something you're looking at actually exists. It's to show character, to demonstrate an emotion that would not be conveyed by anything naturally occurring in the world we live in. When you see Haruo Nakajima pretending to fight a giant puppet resembling a moth, the filmmakers aren't asking you to truly believe that you're watching two enormous animals mauling each other. They want you to see the characters of Godzilla and Mothra dueling each other in the midst of a story about human greed. It's never been about selling you something. It's about using the inherent imagination that comes with the medium to convince an audience that this puppet of a dinosaur is actually a character named Godzilla, peering over a giant building and terrifying the inhabitants below. Your brain filling in the blanks is what creates its impact, not the act of attempting to fill in those blanks within the movie itself so that the audience doesn't have to think about the fact that it's fake. All of it is fake, but one is being honest about it. When I see things from this genre that make me want to laugh, I don't laugh at how horrible it is of a special effect, like a backhanded compliment. I laugh because the filmmakers know what power the characters that are these beasts have over an audience, and they took advantage of it. When you get over the hurdle of understanding that tokusatsu is purely about the ideas conveyed by the effects more than its ability to convince you of its realism, you actually begin to see these men in suits as these characters. You can see Godzilla getting beaten by Gigan. You can see Godzilla walking down Tokyo streets. You can believe that Godzilla is expressing a feeling by the way his face is emoting, and you can believe that people are terrified of a towering monster destroying their city. With Toku, there's a natural weight to it, a gravity and heft to every building that gets destroyed, to every footstep a monster takes. The special effects impact is readable, and much more deeply ingrained into our psyche as real than it would be if it was replaced by a CGI model. All of our brains understand how physics work, how the human body in a suit moves, along with the limitations that come with that. So in a weird roundabout way, your brain doesn't actually have to put the pieces together in order to be convinced. The effect acts exactly the way it does in reality, so your mind is more focused on the character behind such a fictitious scenario, and in these cases, it's an atomic dinosaur. Now, I'm not saying CGI is bad. God knows how many sequences it's brought to life that wouldn't have been possible without it. Despite what I've just said, I love CGI, and there comes a point where CGI is the only way for a certain character or event to come to life as intended. I'm not saying one is better than the other, however, I am saying that one clearly has merit that a lot of people don't want to recognize. Tokusatsu offers us a way out, a way for the impossible to seem grounded without taking away the grit of practical reality. The Showa Godzilla series stories have never been terribly complex. Even in the wake of my very descriptive feelings towards these films, I have to admit that all of them are pretty simple, but it's in that simplicity that I see infinity. Each of these 15 films, even ones that I have said that I have problems with, are able to tell a story with a level of earnesty for its subject matter that never loses its charm. Whether it be an allegory for the horrors of mankind's lust for destruction, dueling monsters in the Pacific, a giant ape caught out of his element, a critique on unchecked capitalism involving a giant moth, an alien invasion forcing enemies into friends, a robotic society meeting their end at the hands of human simplicity, a few strangers stranded on a terrifying island, a radioactive beast learning to be a father, the world war against beings of higher intellect, a young boy's desire to escape the disappointments of life, the horrors of humanity's pollution of Earth, another alien race's attempt to wipe the Earth clean of its decadent residents, an underground civilization that wants revenge for mankind's arrogance, an ancient prophecy detailing a climactic battle of good and evil, and a cyborg's last chance at redemption. These movies have never failed to teach me what it means to send a message, what it means to tell a story. Showa Godzilla is what made me interested in history. It's what made me interested in animals, in philosophy, and filmmaking. Its practical sets and suits told me that no matter how strange it looked, I could do it. If I really wanted to and studied the know-how, I could tell stories just like it, just like they did. It's hard to say I would be who I am without these 15 movies. It's hard to say I'd love the art of film as much as I do without them. These people's creation taught me what I was capable of. That you have the power to create anything as long as you put in the work, and that it can be good in its own right. To anyone wanting to express a feeling, to express it through a story or an image, through art, just do it. Create it. Learn to create it. Stop caring about whether it'll look bad. Stop caring about who sees it or doesn't see it. Do it in spite of your limitations, in spite of what the world is telling you, what it deems not possible. The fact that you did it shows more about your will to be than it does about the worthless expectations of those that will never know what it's like to be you. We have plenty of videos just like this one here on the channel. We also make movies, like the Tree Hunter films, and we're currently 2 episodes in on our Evangelion Abridged series, both of which are on screen. If all that sounds appealing to you, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe so that you don't miss any future videos. The support means more than you can know. God bless.